joining from today. Thank you for joining our Tuesday live stream regarding digital transformation topics of all sorts. My name is Eric Kimberling. I'm the CEO of Third Stage Consulting. We're an independent consulting firm that helps clients throughout the world with their digital transformation journeys. And today's topic is going to be managing your career in digital transformation in 2023 and beyond. So the idea here is we want to talk about just career advice and ways to get started and to advance your career in the digital transformation space. This topic is intended for people that are either working internally within an IT department and or part of a digital transformation, either as an internal resource or as a external consultant. So we're really trying to cover multiple angles here today in terms of career growth. But before we get started and before I introduce our guest, just a couple of logistical things. First of all, if you could just drop in the chat where you're joining from today, what city and country are you in, as well as what your role is. What do you do now, or what are you trying to get out of your career, just so we understand from the audience what it is you're trying to accomplish here. That'll help us tailor some of the conversation for you. In addition to that, too, as we get going here today, if you have questions or topics you'd like to see us cover, please drop that in the chat as well. We're streaming live to YouTube, LinkedIn, Facebook, and Twitter, as well as Twitch. So be sure to drop in the chat. We're keeping an eye on that here, and we'll get to audience questions as we get started here. So the other thing, last but not least, the other logistical item is this is a weekly podcast or a weekly live stream that we host each week. Same time, same place. And we cover different digital transformation topics of all sorts. And this live interview that you're part of here today becomes part of our weekly digital or our weekly transformation ground control podcast. I should probably remember the name of our own podcast before I promote it. It's overrated. So it's Transformation Ground Control. Every Wednesday, new episodes come out. This particular interview that we're having here today with you all, part of it, will become part of the podcast episode that gets released a week from tomorrow. So thanks for being here today and being part of our podcast production. So joining me today to have this conversation about digital transformation careers in 2023, we have two people joining. First of all, Cheatham, who is our global marketing director, also my podcast host. Welcome to the show. Thanks for being here.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Excited for this conversation.
Absolutely, me too. And then secondly, we have Khalid Morris, who's the director of strategy and transformation in our U.S. Denver office. Khalid, thanks for being here today.
Oh, thanks for having me.
So I thought it'd be great to have the two of you on the show here today because I know both of you enjoy some of these topics that we're going to be discussing here today. Kyler, you're a working mom, so you have sort of the angle of how to balance all the various things that moms and working professionals do, as well as just obviously understanding consulting and digital transformation in general. And Khalid, in addition to having an extensive consulting background, the reason I thought you'd be interesting to have in this discussion is because you're a coach as well, which I always find fascinating. I think as someone that coaches little kids, or your kids aren't so little anymore, but your younger kids, coaching them in sports, basketball in particular, that coaching mentality, I think, is something that comes in handy when we start talking about careers and how to evolve in one's career. So I guess just to start, just to get the conversation going here, what are some of the skills that you think are most important for the digital transformation space as we look to 2023 and beyond? What are some of the skills and or characteristics that you think it takes to be successful in today's day and age in the digital transformation space? Why don't we start with you, Khalid? What are your thoughts there?
Well, I think that digital transformation is a pretty broad kind of space. I think it covers, so many lines. So there's so many different ways to come at it. Technical skills are always great. So we'll touch off on which particular ones, I guess, and when it's applicable. But in this case, transformation actually doesn't have a ton to do with kind of these hyper IT sort of skills. It's very business oriented. It's very change oriented. It's having to deal with the business world that's going around you. So really, you can bring into a transformation space kind of broader business skills, broader understanding of how processes work, and re-engineering those particular processes, and then how to talk and work with the staff, the employee base, like the people that are going to be impacted the most. So ironically, I see a lot of HR and a lot of kind of organizational design and change management in the transformation space.
Yeah. Yeah. Good point. I like your point about it being not as technical as you might think. You know, certainly the technical skills are important, but that business understanding, that business acumen, I would argue, is a stronger foundation to work from, or a stronger foundation to build if you really want to be successful in the digital transformation space. What are your thoughts on that, Kyler?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I think there's certain hyper target for technical skills, and that's important as far as a cohesive team. But when it comes to actual transformation, the collaboration and the communication of understanding how technology as a backbone of your organization or institution really touches all of the different departments. So understanding those perspectives and uniting around a really cohesive and clear business strategy is really key. So with that, you need a lot of business technologists and communicators within your transformation team to be able to make sure that you're continuing to maintain your commitment to those strategic goals. And that evolution is something that we've seen in the industry in the last 5 to 10 years become really forefront in making your transformation successful.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with that. And sort of segueing or building on that comment you just made, Kyler, is Ghassan on LinkedIn was coming in hot here this morning on the conversation with his suggestion that anger management skills might be the most important skill. But even though it's a humorous comment, and I think I know Ghassan, and I think he's probably trying to be 50% funny and 50% serious. But regardless of his intent of that comment, I think he brings up a good point, which is the sort of the emotional intelligence and the EQ required to be successful in digital transformations in general, whether you're, you know, an internal leader or a project team member or a consultant helping an organization through a transformation. You know, Khalid, what has some of your experience been in terms of that emotional intelligence or just sort of the soft skills that are required to be successful in this industry?
There's always a contingent that resists change. Like even I think in positive scenarios, but in more negative scenarios, sometimes that contingent is pretty strong. And conflict resolution, I think, is a very powerful skill set when you're dealing with transformational work, because you really have to, talk groups off the cliff, talk people off the cliff as it relates to some of the shifts that are happening. It's sensitive for them. You may have spent a significant amount of time. You may be the foremost expert in a particular application at your organization, and then the organization comes in and shifts. Your careers, a lot of people's careers are tied to a specific application. That's where they feel like they're of value when they're in that application or talking about, whether it's from a technical perspective or just operational. And so they're very sensitive about the idea of we're going to make this gigantic shift and everybody's going to start from ground zero. So no one knows the software. So now you have a competition of that sort of is happening in the field. And so, it's an emotional space transformation. That's why communication, to Kyler's point, is huge. A lot of those communication planning skills, Marcom skills are huge in this particular space, just so you can start to speak to some of the concerns, fears that people have when they're dealing with transformation, what's coming, what's around the corner before anything has even been implemented, to be able to start to talk about how you're going to start to tackle this and what the plan is going to look like for success.
Yeah, makes total sense. What are your thoughts, Kyler?
Yeah, I think building on that, we joke, like Ghassan, who's always a great listener and contributor who makes us laugh on a weekly basis. So thank you, Ghassan, for always bringing that entertainment value. But we joke about how our practitioners in digital transformation are real therapists, because you do have to kind of mine through that resistance that Khalid put on the table, whether it's intentional or not intentional. You have to understand what is kind of the root cause behind that and address it so that you can move forward without disruption or any sort of project issues around what is the team going through, because it is a very high stress environment with a lot of vulnerabilities. And when you think about it from just, an overall human needs standpoint, this is someone's job. It's their livelihood. It's their, the way they provide for their families. So understanding the significance of that fear and how it can, really cause that anxiety in the workplace is something that really has become a true need within a digital transformation process and approach.
Yeah, yeah, totally agree. And Ghassan added to the discussion here again, as far as listening skills and negotiation skills being important to transformation. I think that's something that's really important. I mean, I think, especially in consulting, I think that's one thing that I think consultants in general are not good at, but they should be a lot better at, or at least the more successful consultants I've worked with are the ones that can listen the most and really understand the needs of a business. I think one of the problems with our industry in the digital transformation space is we have this mentality in general that we have the answers. We have the best practices, we have the technology, we have a proven solution that will work for your business if you would just get your own needs out of the way and just use our software. And so it creates this mentality of we don't need to listen because we have best practices, we have the answers. But I think that's highly ineffective, especially from a change management perspective and creating change resistance to the process. And one of the best ways to mitigate resistance to change is to just listen and understand what the needs are. Even if the solution or the answer you come to is the same either way, at least you've listened and you kind of understand what the needs are. So I think that's a really important point too, is, that listening piece of it, in my opinion, it's the most important skill, in my opinion, for being a good consultant. But even just being a project team member, a CIO, a transformation lead, whatever your role might be, especially a change manager, if you're part of the change management team, you really have to listen and understand the needs. Otherwise, you're going to get a lot of blowback from the organization, for sure. So Kyler, I know you had some questions too you wanted to ask. So maybe I'll turn it to you to maybe drill Khalid and I a bit on some of your questions for us.
Yeah, good. Can you feel my energy, my moderation energy? It's so hard for me to always be the one not asking the question.
Yeah, I know you're just dying to jump in.
Over here, chomping at the bit, if you will. But, I know both of you have had very successful careers in just overall IT consulting, digital transformation consulting, change management consulting, which is now kind of grown into the digital transformation industry holistically. And I wonder if I could ask you, looking into 2023 or in the 2020s and beyond, what are some of those roles that you feel like are really high demand when it comes to the digital transformation industry? And let's start with you, Eric. What are some roles that you've seen kind of emerge and you continue to see grow?
Well, two that come to mind off the bat are, one is architecture. Anyone that can, and I know I'm moving straight off the emotional soft skills straight into the technical stuff by saying architecture, but it is a hard skill that I think a lot of organizations need and could benefit from, especially with all the emerging technologies that are out there and the uses of multiple technologies throughout an organization. Someone that can understand architecture and how it all ties together, I think, is very important. And then the other piece that comes to mind is anything to do with data science, analytics, business intelligence. That's such an important thing right now from a technical skill set perspective. And then, there's other things like change management, program management that are they've always been really important. They will continue to be really important. So I do not want to be dismissive of those important skills either. But I think the two that come to mind as far as things that are changing and becoming more important, I'd say architecture and analytics and the whole data science piece of it.
Absolutely. And Khalid, being kind of an expert, our resident expert in data science and those maybe more hard technical skills, what are some things that you've seen maybe on the technical side and then the not so technical side as emerging roles in digital transformation?
Yeah, ironically, it feels like a lot of transformation work is moving a little more niche. There's broader, you think of it from an ERP perspective, like all of the functional areas that are being impacted by a transformational journey. But I'm seeing a lot of companies kind of go more narrow, kind of just the finance department itself is looking for a transformational support or expert. And you might look at specifically on like the logistics or supply chain side, but it seems like there's a demand that's sort of emerging for transformation within specific niches or within specific functional areas. And it's the same work. It kind of gets into a lot of those architectural spaces, but I think a lot of the energy there has to do with the edge systems, if you will, that are sort of emerging. So you'll have like a group like a finance or logistics group that knows they don't have the budget to reshape all of their needs there, but they know, look, we have enough to sort of just get this one application. Maybe it's budgeting, maybe it's not connected, or they'll figure out how to connect it to the rest of the system, but they need something very specific, and they know it's going to require a certain amount of transformation on the team side, on the finance team side. So then they will look for those kind of skill sets, right? And it's impacting on the data side. So they might look for a technical resource or a transformation resource that can help them specifically, not for the company, but just on the finance side or just the logistics side. And so I think the technical skills are always going to be in demand from an IT or transformation perspective. They're always going to be in demand. But you still, I don't want those to cloud the broad need there, because you're still in the same vein of requiring communication and a lot of those soft skills that, I think sometimes on the technical side, they rely on, they get too reliant on having technical acumen. And I think it's great. It's like, if you're a software engineer out there, a great software engineer is like a great lawyer. You don't need it, and you don't know you need that person until they're there. And it's like, well, you saved me. Like, there's no way we can get out of it. So there's no substitute for great technical acumen. But I think people that really have success in this space are able to, pull that into the soft skills that are still extremely necessary, because everyone isn't necessarily going to be dealing with the technical aspect. You have to be able to communicate what's needed there. You have to have soft skills that connect to some of those harder technical skills for, I think, to have success in transformation. And really, leadership style or upper echelon type of IT or development success as well.
For sure. Yeah. And I want to jump into leadership a little bit as well. But I want to get back to our audience real quick. And Eric is driving, so he can help me pull up some of these comments. But just looking at where our global audience is joining us from, we have Newcastle, England, Jake over on YouTube. He's looking to be a cloud consultant. So great conversation to listen to. Ghassan from Kuwait, Mario, who's from Dallas. Daniel up in Grand Forks, North Dakota, who's probably frozen at this point. Chris from Oklahoma, Sam Graham from Spain, Ryan from Denver. So I want to go into actually a question from Daniel on LinkedIn that talked about what are the similarities, specifically, Khalid, you see between coaching and your athletics background. And Khalid was a collegiate athlete and still a very, very renowned coach in our area and digital transformation. And before I let you answer this question, we do have some moderators in the comments here, so they'll drop some additional supplementary content. Actually, Khalid and Eric did a full live stream on what is it like to coach through a digital transformation. So we'll link that here so you can see that discussion. But it's a definitely a very true and valuable connection between being a digital transformation coach and both of your sons, I know, are play basketball as well. So if you want to touch on kind of what that looks like from a coaching perspective.
I'm honestly, it's leadership. I mean, a good coach is a good leader, and obviously, I deal more with kids, but it's easy to be a leader of kids, right? Because they don't know that much, and so they're just looking to you, and But in the workplace, you're dealing with men, you're dealing with women, and these are adults that are bringing a certain amount of, for lack of a better word, baggage, to the table, whether it's their own careers, their anxieties, concerns, like future plans, ambitions. They're bringing all of these things to the workplace every single day, and whether they work remotely or if it's an on-site. And so from a transformation perspective, you have to be a leader, and you have to bring leadership skills to the conversation. That's why technical is not enough. You have to be able to connect with people and help people through what it is that they're dealing with, so that everyone can be on the same page. That's the tough part about coaching. It's you have different skill levels. Some people are great, some people aren't, but just the same, we all have to be on the same page about how we're going to approach a situation or how we're going to have success. And that's the part that I think sometimes people miss, but that's where that similarity, really happens. This is a leadership conversation, and you have to bring those skills to the table to really move a group of adults to where they need to be.
Absolutely. And building on that, really great point, Eric. When you come in as a consultant and you're working with the leadership of an organization, how do you create that comfortability or that approachability with the leadership team to ensure you can create an impact in helping them to progress their project forward?
Well, I think a lot of it gets back to, first of all, building credibility. As an outside consultant, you have to have a certain amount of credibility. You have to be trusted. The client has to like you. The executive team has to just like you as a person, which is difficult because, not everyone's as likable as others. So that makes it a little bit more difficult. But I think some of the best ways to build that credibility and trust are to listen, back to the listening point, and really just understand what the needs are. I think, one of the big challenges in the digital transformation space that I see in the last, I don't know, 3 to 5 years maybe, is an emerging or a growing distrust of the digital transformation incumbents. So like the big software vendors, the big system integrators. There's always been some skepticism, but lately in the last few years, it feels like it's getting worse. And I think the reason for that is because, again, we as an industry are not listening. We're coming in with our prepackaged, pre-configured solutions. We're coming in with our cloud technologies that are silver bullets that solve all the world's problems, and we're sort of force fitting it into situations where it doesn't belong. And of course, the failure rate of digital transformations being so high as it's always been, I think that's contributing to the lack of trust in the market. So I think, if you're part of a digital transformation team, or especially if you're a consultant, building that credibility by listening, understanding, and just being open-minded too. I think that's another thing, is you can't just drink the Kool-Aid of SAP or Microsoft or Oracle or Deloitte or Accenture or whatever, insert big name here. They tend to have their sort of their right answers, if you will. And I think one of the keys to being an effective transformation team member and or consultant is to not come in with the answers predefined, but really just understand and diagnose and create a solution and help execute a solution that is aligned with strategic goals and objectives. Back to your point earlier, Kyler.
Yeah, absolutely. That's 100% what an effective consultant does. So I want to kind of go down the rise of those independents, or the success of overall Third Stage. If you are unaware, Third Stage did just receive a top 1/3 ranking on Inc. magazine's 5,000 fastest growing companies in the United States. So that's something that is a kind of a huge honor for us. It's our first year on the list as a company that's only 4 years old. And we've seen this emergence within the industry of clients and our community reaching out for that independent and that agnostic advice. And Khalid, is someone who's worked on kind of both sides of being an independent consultant and then also, being a system integrator and being on that side of the business. Why do you think that shift is happening specifically in the industry? And has such volume and momentum behind it?
It's interesting. That's an interesting question. I think it's probably twofold. First, I think the model for a lot of those system integrators is to attack problems with people, and so the teams are huge where they historically have been, and that's part of the price tag, of kind of throwing 50 people at a problem. I've been on implementation projects with really large footprints, and internally the conversation was about coverage. Let's make sure the client knows we're there, and you're there with the people that are there, and you're like, they really don't need to be there, right? Like, because they're half of them are learning, are trying to figure it out. Other half of them are working. Like it's sort of this mix of too many people trying to deal with a complicated problem. I think that with a lot of the independent groups, they've been able to target specific problems a little bit more strategically, right? Where you kind of have this smaller, smart team that's dealing with a, core aspect of the problem, and they sound, they make more sense, so to speak, for a lot of organizations versus trying to just throw a bunch of money or a bunch of resources at it, but rather just attacking it with a small, smart plan that's acute in nature, but is highly, highly effective, right? Or even having a methodology behind that sort of time, that's sort of proven, as opposed to, again, just resourcing a problem. So I guess there's different, aspects to it, but based from the experiences that I've had, I would say that I think a lot of those independent groups are a little more strategic.
That's a really interesting answer. And with that strategy, Eric, it seems like you've seen the need for that in the industry and have a quite remarkable story on how you've created not only content and conversation around that in the public and social media space, but also how you've created, kind of carved out that niche for specific consultancy and client work. Can you talk a little bit about how you saw that need, or how your instincts kind of told you that that was going to be something that was a real value in the marketplace, that independent and agnostic lens to digital transformation?
Yeah, it actually started really early in my career when I was working at one of the aforementioned big system integrators. That's where I started my career, was at Price Waterhouse, doing change management consulting primarily. Although I also did software selection and process reengineering and some other stuff. But I was jaded. On one hand, I really liked consulting from the start, but I also really didn't like it because of the bias that we had, and I was part of that. And I actually remember early on when I would go to work, when I'd go to the client or when I was traveling to a client, a lot of times I would put on that song, Welcome to the Machine by Pink Floyd. And if you know that song, if anyone that knows that song, it's about just being part of the machine and a cog in the machine and being taken advantage of and all that kind of theme. And it might be a bit extreme, but that's sort of how I felt being in the industry at the time, is I felt like I was part of this machine and I felt kind of dirty, like I just didn't feel like I was doing the right thing. And that's what it was expected of me, was not to do the right thing, in my opinion. And so, and actually, Sam Graham had a question that I think maybe helps point this out, or maybe build on your question a little bit more. But he asked the question: is a consultant with only one tool actually just a salesperson? And how much do consultancies and sales overlap? And that's a brilliant question, because I've never really thought of it in that context. But that, in my opinion, that question strikes at the heart of what's wrong with our industry and what's wrong with digital transformations in general. Is that when you're not independent, you're affiliated with some software solution, some software vendor. And your job is to promote that product and to figure out how to expand the footprint of that product, how to implement it to as many people as you can within an organization. The implementing company typically gets commission on how much software they're selling. So there's just a ton of monetary incentive to push one product. And so, to Sam's point, consultants oftentimes are just glorified salespeople. They're out there to promote a product and to push that product out to people. And sometimes it's the right fit, sometimes it's not. Too often it's not the right fit, and it ends up being sort of forcing a square peg into a round hole. Not to say that, people listening should really second guess the technology they're deploying, but you should really be selective about where you deploy technology instead of just, deploying, one size fits all answer. So I think, that independent model, in my opinion, is really important, because back to the trust thing, it's hard to trust someone is getting paid to promote one product over another or one technology, regardless of whether or not it's the right fit for you. And so that independence, I think, one thing I've noticed in our thought leadership and just YouTube videos, podcasts, all that stuff, is people trust us. I mean, they trust us because we're not trying to sell anything. We're pretty transparent that we make money from our clients. Clients pay us to do stuff, and that's where we make our money. That's the only place that we make money from. We don't make money from software vendors. We don't get commission. So our sole focus is on our clients, which may sound like a no-brainer, but it's not a no-brainer, because the subtle difference with other consulting firms is, yes, they're making money from their clients, but they're also making money, a lot of money, from software vendors for promoting certain products. So I think that's, that independence, I thought, even back when I was part of the machine, listening to Pink Floyd, Welcome to the Machine.
Welcome to the Machine.
Listen to the song. It's a really good song if you don't know it. It's a little dark, but it's super intense. I like it a lot. I still listen to it, even though I'm not part of the machine. although we sort of are. But anyway,
We sort of are, but I want to piggyback on. I think that's an interesting perspective. I think it's a great question, and I'm gonna speak from the dark side here on that a little bit. I think the first thing you have to understand with that kind of question or issue is the software development lifecycle. You design before you build. You don't build before you design. And if you talk to those one tool guys before you actually design, yeah, they're going to be talking about their expertise. There was a comment earlier about the cloud and saying that there was an individual that wanted to be a cloud consultant. Which one? Are you going to be Azure? Are you going to go that route? You almost have to pick your tool and sharpen it. And I love the idea of not picking tools and just learning everything that I possibly can. But you're going to be limited because you can't know it all. And so, you then have to look at that and say, am I going to go with Amazon? Am I going to go Azure? Am I going to be an expert at one or the other? Am I going to go Google Cloud? And there's some others that are emerging. I think even Apple is trying. But where am I going to put my, flag in the sand there? And then you become that one tool, right? But the problem with it is, from an architecture perspective, we had a lot of talks about, architecture. You need to do that work first. You need to understand what you're trying to accomplish first. And that has to be independent. That has to not really be corroded with experts that only know one thing. And then they kind of say, well, if you chose this software, you're not ready for that conversation yet, right? You're still in a space where you're trying to figure out what makes the most sense for my organization. What am I trying to accomplish? Almost like if I'm trying to build a custom application, I just want to kind of go through the design of what skills I need before I go to the marketplace and then say, okay, I need somebody that can do this language or that language or has expertise in this thing or that, right? I kind of need to plan that out first. So the independence is huge in the front end. I think it's a requirement on the front end, right? And then after then you can kind of go about choosing the right one skill guy. And yeah, they'll sell themselves into it and you're listening to it, but you're listening to it from the perspective of, I know I need this skill. I know I want that skill. And you've already made that determination from an independent design that you've structured.
Yeah. And that's why we always like to have, those perspectives from understanding our vendor partners as well. Include you always kind of provide that dichotomy to Eric's disruptor over here, Pink Floyd against the machine. So I think that's the important part of it. And I'm glad that you brought this one up. Fernando actually, not to call him out, but he reached out to me on LinkedIn actually last night. And we had a conversation about how, as a younger person in your career and getting to these bigger four or agencies can be challenging because they throw a ton of money at you and offer a real stable type of work environment. So I wonder what you guys would say to someone in that might be fresh out of college, just right out of kind of the graduate area, going into the workforce, that's interested in digital transformation, but doesn't quite know how to do what you're saying, Khalid, to kind of pick a tool, pick a skill set. They just don't have the background or the experience. What are some things that they could do? And I'll just give Fernando complete props right here. He's reaching out to people in the industry. He's joining live streams. He's understanding what that looks like as far as his career. And I think that's so important to kind of join that conversation. But with you two, I kind of want to get your perspective. So let's start with you, Eric. I know you work with a lot of young people, and our moderators can pop actually some of our college student content in the chat here, so you can kind of see how Eric works with that kind of younger workforce. But understanding what that looks like, I think is so important, especially for our emerging workforce in the independence area.
Yeah, absolutely. So, one thing I think I always encourage college kids or recent college graduates to think about is to think about what your strengths are. You may not have a ton of experience, but let's think about what your strengths are and what transferable strengths you have. One of the biggest things, at least when we're hiring at third stage, one of the big advantages that a recent college graduate has is they haven't been jaded by the machine. They haven't been, biased by the machine. They haven't been part of it yet. And so you don't have those sort of bad habits or myopic views of the world that you have to try and change, which is really difficult with a really experienced consultant. So I think you have to look at, well, that's a plus, right? You've got You've got a fresh set of eyes, a fresh perspective as a younger, newer person to consulting. And then also, look to, what you studied in school or what extracurricular activities you're involved with or internships that you've been involved with that might provide some skills that are transferable. So things that demonstrates that you are a good communicator, a good listener. I always look for people too. Two things that catch my eye on a resume that sound like they have nothing to do with consulting, but I think they do, is someone who was involved in athletics and or coaching. So that's part of what I think makes Khalid such a good consultant is he was a competitive collegiate athlete and now he's a coach, and he just has a different mentality about teamwork and communication and things of that nature. But the other thing on top of that is people that have worked in semi-intense customer service situations, like people that have waited tables or been a server at a restaurant or customer service reps, people that have been under fire, presumably from angry customers and have to have a relatively high emotional EQ to be able to deal with that. Those are skills that are really hard to teach. I can't, for example, me, myself as a leader, I don't know how to teach someone to listen more and to deal with angry customers and that sort of thing unless you've been through it. And so, you may think that has nothing to do with it, but if you've been a server at a restaurant or whatever, talk about how that applies to consulting. And then, of course, if you can get an internship that has some sort of relevance to consulting or digital transformation in general, whether it's a technical role or a process improvement role, maybe you're part of a change team or whatever the case may be. That, for example, is how I really got my foot in the door in consulting. Is I really just stumbled across an internship at my school when I was getting my master's degree, my MBA. It was a CIO at a local company, a manufacturing company. They were implementing Oracle, and they wanted an intern to come in and help redesign business processes. And I didn't care about the technology piece or ERP at that time. All I cared about was I really liked supply chain and operations, and that was my focus. And so I dove into that. But then I learned to enjoy technology, and I realized how important that process improvement background that I developed in that year-long internship, that's what got me in the door at PwC and led me to Be Angry listening to Pink Floyd, Welcome to the Machine. So, and eventually to Third Stage to get to where we are today.
I really like the customer service experience piece there. And it seems like it may sound like left field for some in the audience, but you have to understand that the first most basic skill that you'll need in consultancy to have any kind of success is the trust advisor relationship. Once that is broken, you walk on a job, you either have all the credibility in the world for whatever reason, they might have talked you up or whatever, or you have zero credibility, right? You walk in and everyone's looking at you sideways, like, who is this individual? Do they know anything? Right. So from there, whether you're starting with 100 or you're starting at 0, you have to build credibility. And part of how you go about the process of building that credibility are some of those same skills that are demonstrated with someone on the server side. It's the little things. It's did you bring my drink back? You said you were going to bring my drink back, and they didn't walk off. And it just makes you it puts you in a whole nother mode. Like all of a sudden it's like, I don't have a drink. Like, what are you doing? Did you get my order right? Like, who are you? It just breaks everything else down just because they said, oh, I'll be right back with the drink. And an hour later they didn't. So it's that little break right there that just disrupted the entire experience. And that's what happens on the field in consulting. You have to constantly build up those small wins, those little things that sort of, put the client at ease, like, saying they're a part of what they say they're going to do, they do well. It turns into this sort of just conversation. You become a part of their staff, an extension of their staff, and then they start to trust you. And that's where the consulting really happens and begins and runs. So it's for me, it's very important to be able to manage relationships, to build on relationships when you're kind of going into these engagements. And the way you can start, you can start with whatever skill you have. If you're finance, I started my consulting career really started because I had a financial background. I knew accounting. And so I started working there. But it doesn't really matter what you start with. You can bring into that space, anything across, because there's always going to be a need for a consultant to do various aspects. So you can bring what you already have and know, but no matter what, you have to manage relationships and you have to build credible relationships. 'Cause I've been on jobs where it has fallen apart. I've been on jobs where I've been able to maintain it well. And that's the biggest takeaway for me is just making sure that that's always in place.
Yeah, and I think a lot of times, to your point, Khalid, people overcomplicate the relationship side of it. It's really
Right,
just being someone that can be trustworthy, that is
right.
authentic, that's able to sit in that room and have that conversation. It really doesn't matter if you have 50 years of experience or 5. Just being able to have that trust in that client relationship is so important. And just real quick, I see many of you kind of self-promoting in the comments here, which I absolutely love, which is great. So we are hiring actively at Third Stage. We do it a little different as we match skill sets with our culture and our clients, as opposed to kind of just numbers and resumes. If you are interested at working at Third Stage or joining our team, or having that conversation about who we are, you can email work@thirdstage-consulting.com. You can also visit our careers page on our website and input a form that way too. So please include your resume and a little bit about your understanding of kind of the third stage approach. Helps us see if you're a good match. So thank you for your engagement and passion about joining this team, as well, that we're all obviously super passionate about. So I want to kind of shift gears, still on the same lines of going into digital transformation careers. But what if you're a seasoned professional? For example, I had a teacher reach out to me the other day on LinkedIn, talking about how they wanted to transition from teaching into organizational change management and business communications, again along those coaching lines. What advice would you give to someone who's making that shift into their career, who might already have a background in other things? And Cleve, let's start with you this time.
Oh, it's, I mean, sometimes you have to sell it. I do think that there is a lot of sales that happens in the consulting space, and sometimes you have to sell your skill. But something like teaching is insanely valuable. One of my friends, got into consulting that way. Just was a master's in education, just a teacher's teacher, and they were able to build curriculums for these kind of software applications and kind of build these books that they were able to kind of pass on to clients and sort of build out this learning curve. And they were flying all over the place, and it was this full curriculum that they were able to do. Who's going to do a curriculum better than a teacher? Right. I mean, they know it like the back of their hand. Like, how do they sort of educate someone who doesn't know kind of where they're going with that particular curriculum? Every software company needs that particular skill. So it's something as consulting is everything. So long as you're an expert at something, right, there's going to be a tie for that, I think, in the business world. It's just a matter of where, and you may not necessarily know where, but certainly something like teaching in the organizational change space is ginormous, and I think they need more, to be honest, because the people that are doing this curriculum work right now aren't teachers. The people that are doing the education side or the training aspects, and what's one thing that we are sensitive to in the field is kind of really having those conversations about what is your training plan need to look like, making sure that it's adequate, because you really want to make sure that the staff is not just comfortable with the software that is being implemented, but that they are well trained and that they feel empowered by it, right? And that really happens, I think, with a solid training plan, solid curriculums, and the likes. And I'm telling you, I don't see a lot of them often, certainly from a lot of the software companies that are sort of rolling their softwares out.
Absolutely. And that knowledge transfer and overall user adoption
Yeah.
is one of the ways that we often see a lack of benefits realization and
Right.
business value, right, around software. You could buy the coolest, shiniest, most beautiful software in the world, but if your organization doesn't know how to use it or leverage it or is scared of it, then you're not going to actually feel that ROI, which is ultimately, the goal of new technology. So very, very good point. What about you, Eric? What advice would you give to someone who might be in a midst of a different career that wants to shift over to consulting?
Well, I think you have an advantage in that you have some experience, and some of that experience is highly likely to be relevant to consulting. So if you think about someone who, for example, is an internal supply chain or procurement clerk or, whatever. They worked in supply chain or procurement or, some other business function. I'd really highlight that and say, supply chain really well, or, finance and accounting really well, whatever the area is, because the reality of the industry, despite the works that I've sort of railed on here, are really hammered today in today's conversation. The reality is that's how the industry is built. It's built on specialization, and it's built on deep knowledge, either in a functional area and or a specific technology. So if you have deep experience in a functional area, highlight that, because that's going to be a strength, and that's going to catch someone's eye in the industry. The other thing is the technology too. Even if you're just a user of a leading ERP system, that's big. And I would put that on your resume. I'd highlight that, because there's, if you use Microsoft Dynamics, for example, or SAP S/4HANA, whatever the system is, if you're a user of that and you know the system fairly well, better than, the average new consultant straight out of college, then you would want to highlight that and say you understand, the order to cash process within SAP or whatever. So really highlighting those and bumping those things to the top of your resume, sort of like key skills and competencies that you have. And again, it goes back to what I'd say to recent college graduates too, is instead of worrying so much about what you don't have, it's a matter of really looking at, it may be limited. It may not be as deep as someone who's been in consulting for 20 or 30 years, but you probably have some unique experiences that are different from a lifelong consultant like myself. I don't understand what it's like to be an internal IT team member. I just don't have that perspective because I've never done it. But if you have, highlight that and really showcase that, because I think that's going to be a big differentiator potentially in the marketplace. So that's another type of person we like to hire, someone who has some experience, maybe never done consulting, but they've got these transferable relevant skills as well. And so I think it's a matter of just identifying what those are and really highlighting that in your CV or your resume.
Absolutely. And even, technology natives, early adopters, what platforms have you used? I mean, we can't all be TikTok famous like Eric is, but, we can still have, that knowledge of platforms, and I'll speak to all of those kind of non-technical people in the digital transformation space. There is space for creatives and communicators within that too. I recently wrote a blog. I'll shout out to the moms, right? I have a 2-year-old and a 3-year-old, but how moms make the best project managers, because they have a lot of adversity that they need to kind of overcome. So there is room for that experience that might not be kind of exactly in those categories that you see as the quote unquote traditional digital transformation consultant. The industry is changing. It's really exciting. And I want to go back to our audience and bring up a question here from Malcolm. It's kind of a comment and a question. And he kind of talked about, from my consultancy experience, the worst experience is when a client has been sold the wrong software or module. One consultancy manager I had worked with had a good solution to this. If sales had sold something and the consultancy could not deliver, they asked sales to come back and demonstrate how to get it to work or not on site. So just kind of evolving this question a little bit, this is a key competency to a good consultant, is selecting a solution, listening to the client about their needs and requirements. Building on this, what are some other key competencies or skill sets that a consultant needs to have when advising on a new software or a technical tool? Because I think this is a really important aspect of that, and staying true to the overall client's goals and objective as a business. So Eric, let's kind of start with you on this one to see if you can kind of take us through what that looks like from a real life example perspective.
Yeah, so I think the key here is, if you have, first of all, if you have that objective view and you're not coming in with, again, the right answer up front, that's going to give you an open mind, and you're going to be more open to alternatives to just a one size fits all, technology solution. The other thing that I think this question gets to is the fact that, most of the time during evaluation processes, you have a sales rep who is clearly incentivized to sell the software. So their leading answer to most questions is going to be yes. Can your software do A, B, or C? They're conditioned to say yes, it can. It may not do it well, but it can do it, right? And that's the gray area that often gets missed is, most ERP systems or technologies that are designed for a certain type of function can meet, most clients' business requirements to some degree, but there's a gray area there of, well, it can do it, but how well can it do it? And so having first of all, a broad knowledge of different technologies in the space, as well as having tool sets that provide some objective data. And one of the problems with the industry, again, I don't want to beat up our own industry too much. I've done plenty of that here so far today, but I'll do it again because it's important. But if you look at even like Gartner and Forrester, you look at Gartner in particular, they're a huge industry analyst firm. A lot of CIOs and internal organizations rely on Gartner's magic quadrants and analysis of the industry, which is fine. That's a data point, but you have to understand software vendors commission those studies. And so you're getting a false sense of third-party validation of how awesome a certain technology is when the software vendor just paid Gartner to put out that magic quadrant where they're in the top right corner and they're awesome. They're the best thing since sliced bread. And so, but then you think, well, what other options do I have? I've got Gartner. I've got the software sales rep. Who else am I going to turn to? And that's where you look to, independents or independent resources like Third Stage. But more specifically, we have a database that we use that tracks specific business requirements, about 30,000 different business requirements against several hundred different enterprise technologies. And it doesn't just track whether or not software can do something, it tracks how well software can do it. And that's really a key thing, because in this question here from Malcolm, it sounds like sales sold a bill of goods. It said, yes, our software can do this, and they convinced them of it, but then the delivery team comes in and says, we don't even know, we don't know how to make it do what the client wants it to do. And that could have been a breakdown in that lack of independence or that lack of objective assessment of that technology and its ability to fit those needs. So I think that it goes back to the objective and technology unbiased view of the world that's so important.
Absolutely. And Khalid, this is what you do on a daily basis, right? So this is kind of, what you manage and lead here at Third Stage. So very curious to hear kind of your opinion and thoughts.
I think it's dirty business. I get that. That happens all the time. I mean, I can't explain how many. I've had a lot of Big Four experience over the course of my career, and so I've done a lot of implementations on that stage. And I don't know if I remember one where I felt like this is a great application for what it is that they're doing. I think in all instances, it was just, what in the world? Who decided to do this? Like, and in the field, it was constantly, because consulting, this is all about solving problems. I mean, they're trying on the sales side, they're trying to solve problems. On the delivery side, they're trying to solve problems. And the problems that, we're trying to solve on the delivery side, when you have this application that really isn't a good fit for the problems that an organization may be dealing with, or the requirements, is you start doing these gymnastics of, how am I going to make this work? How am I going to adjust this thing? How are we? And it becomes these small kind of rooms where everyone's kind of sitting around, like, how are we going to do this? They're designing up different constructs to sort of beat up the software to do things that it essentially cannot do. I think it all goes back to, in the very, very beginning, you kind of need a level of independence, a level of a vision for how this whole thing is going to work. Then you fit the parts into that vision. And when you don't do that, I think you open the door to kind of being on the other side, right? Where you have a reactive delivery cycle. And I think that's where the negative is. That's where you see all the problems with the machine, if you will, where you have a bunch of delivery consultants trying to react to problems that really they shouldn't be reacting to, right? Or something worse, right? Where you have implementations that fail, or they just are poor fits, and kind of turns into this legal issue. We do a lot of expert witness and just kind of reading through the cases and situations that we're coming across. It's just problem after problem. A lot of the times you're thinking, why did they decide to go in this direction in the first place? Well, it was a great salesman. So you can't get caught up in the sales. I think you need to get more so visionary with what it is your business needs, what direction that your business is going, and start to paint the picture before your technical resources even step through the door. And that way you have a clear perspective around who should be coming through the door, what it is that you'll need, what they'll be doing, where they need to connect with other aspects of your organization to really fit it the way you need it to be. And it starts to be, I think, an architecture that really supports your business model, right? Versus you trying to take your business model and fit it to a architecture that doesn't really, that's more standard and doesn't really support what you're doing.
Absolutely. Yeah, that core ability to be aligned and have a plan around your business goals. What are you trying to achieve with this new tool or software is so key. And as Khalid mentioned, we do a ton of expert witness work, and hopefully a digital transformation project will never get to that point where it's involving litigation. But Eric and some of our other expert witnesses do testify, because that's how bad it can get when you don't select a tool, or you don't have, more importantly, that cohesive approach between all of the different parties working on your digital transformation, and that dedication to that strategic alignment. And most importantly, the quality assurance around that. And that's a lot what we do here at Third Stage, is come in as kind of that PMO type of resource that continues to keep the project on track and all of the different agendas in check. So that's something that we've seen as emerging work, especially in the last couple years since starting Third Stage, a true need in the industry. So I want to ask a question from Sam Graham here, because I think this is a very interesting question. He talks about, is there an advantage to working first with the small outfit or more boutique agency like Third Stage, or should you go into more targeted jobs? And I think this is an interesting question, because both of you bring learnings from that bigger agency background, and really had that awareness and understanding about what you wanted out of your career, or what you wanted to provide as value to your clients. So what would be your overall recommendation? And before I turn it over to you, Khalid, I'm just going to say Sam Graham is a top thought leader in the ERP and digital transformation space. We're all huge fans of him. If you are interested, I highly recommend connecting with him and asking him questions in this space too. One of these days, we're shameless plug here, we're going to get him on the podcast.
Yeah, we're going to start a social media campaign to pressure Sam Graham to be on this live stream. We're going to make it happen somehow, Sam.
Get on the pod stream, Sam. I think it's a great question though, and for me, there is no answer to it. To be frank, I'll tell you my experience, which was actually coming through a small outfit. Eric actually brought me into the consulting space. I then sort of branched off and went into other companies, Big Four groups, et cetera. And now I'm back working with Eric now, 20 years, 15 years later, not to date ourselves. But I say that because my experience, and obviously you guys have a sense of what Eric's perspective is. He's had the same perspective and really pioneered independence in this space, and he has contaminated my mind with that. So because I worked with Eric early, because I worked with Eric in that small outfit, when I started to branch off and kind of go into the machine, if you will, I never wanted to be connected to one application. I always wanted to learn other models that are out there. I brought in that sort of small independent perspective into kind of these more structured patterns that sort of exist in consulting. And for me, it was extremely healthy. So for me, I'd probably lean on the side of kind of, it's okay to kind of work with an outfit and kind of get some particulars, whether it's methodology or whether it's kind of that kind of perspective, and then bring it into the bigger consultant world, right? But because the dangers of living in that big consultant world first is, unless you're, a raging independent like Eric is, you start to sort of get real narrow into the, this is the best way to go about it, right? Whether it's one tool mentality, because that's kind of what happens when you go into the bigger outfits, is you get into that specialization that the field naturally pushes you into, and it can work against you later. Think about the perspective of, you've spent 15 years on a particular application, and then all of a sudden that application has been discontinued. Like, where's your career go from there, right? So being a specialist is good, but it's important that you think beyond just one particular tool. And when you're working with those big outfits, that's kind of where they push you. So
the other thing too is just the breadth of background you get versus the the structure and the focus. So, if you go to a big consulting firm, the advantages are that you're in a highly structured environment. It's set up to where you can't fail. Even if you try, you can't really fail or harm a client, or not, I shouldn't say harm a client, but you can't really fail as a consultant on a team because there's so many safeguards in place to ensure that doesn't happen, which can be good if you're starting out. You've got a safety net, you've got a lot of support, a lot of structure, but you're sort of pigeonholed, early on. You're sort of put into a little box, and you need to stay in that box. And that's part of how they ensure that you don't fail, is because you're in your box. You're not getting ahead of your skis or anything like that. The advantage of working at a smaller firm, or it could be a disadvantage depending on your personality and what you're trying to do. But the advantage, in my opinion, is that a smaller firm is going to have less structure. It's more entrepreneurial, and you get a broader view of consulting. You're not forced into a box, but that can be stressful for some people because they want to be in a box. They want to ease into it. They want the structure. They want the really solid support system. And I don't want to suggest companies like us at Third Stage, we're not supportive. We are supportive, but we just don't have the structure and the, some of that infrastructure that can provide some of that perceived safety. So I think a lot of it comes down to what you want. I mean, and back into what Khalid was saying too, and using his background and my background as an example, you don't have to pick one and stick with it forever. I mean, you might decide, okay, I'll start off at a big firm and then go to a small firm, or vice versa. Do what Khalid did. You could start off at a independent or a smaller firm and then go work for one of the bigger guys. It just really depends on what you do. There's a lot of turnover at the big consulting firms. Most people don't last more than 2 years, which is about what I lasted. And I can say with 100% certainty, if I wasn't doing technology agnostic consulting now, I would not be a consultant right now. I don't know what I'd be doing, but it wouldn't be consulting. So, it's just a matter of what it is you like and what's important to you, in your career.
You'd be a Pink Floyd groupie, definitely.
Totally.
For sure.
Or a DJ, or I don't know.
Yeah.
Right.
Maybe an Uber driver. I don't know. There's so many options.
Yeah. Just to round that out with just basic career advice, it sounds like that awareness in what works for you and that understanding of what you want professionally and what your values and integrity are in dedication to the organization. And then also that gratitude for what you learned from organizations that might not have matched that, but you were able to harvest a lot of really core skills out of that to build on your career.
Yeah. One thing I would add to really quickly, Kyler, just in the interest of time, I know we're trying to wrap up here, but one thing I want to add to what you just said, in building on another point you made that was really important, but I feel like it's worth highlighting, is you talked about being a mom and how you've learned so much about project management in that case. And we've talked about Khalid and how he's learned about, how coaching is applied to his consulting background. But I think that's the other thing is, it's a sensitive thing to talk about, because in the United States and some other countries, it's highly sensitive and sometimes illegal to ask questions about your life situation. But there's things in your life situation that probably could make you a good, digital transformation team member, whether it's coaching, being a mom, if you have a blue collar background and you just are used to hard work, or a military background. That's another thing that we notice a correlation between work ethic and willingness to roll up their sleeves and get the job done. So if you look at things like that too, and really build on those, and be, you use the word gratitude. I'd be proud of it. I'd go a step further and say you should be proud of that and highlight those things and say, I was in the military. Here's what I learned about things that are relevant to digital transformation. I may have never done it, but I have done things that a lot of people haven't done. So whether it's military or being a parent or a coach or whatever, I mean, look to your unique background and try and leverage that and highlight those strengths. I think that's really important.
Absolutely. Incredibly well said, and a great place to end, although we could, talk about this for hours on end. But just as a reminder, if you're interested in joining the Third Stage team or learning more about us, please email us at work@thirdstage-consulting.com, and you can connect with all of us on LinkedIn and reach out that way as well. We also have our newly released 2023 digital transformation report that's available for free download on our website, that kind of goes through a holistic approach to digital transformation. You can learn more about what it looks like and all the aspects of career consulting around that. But I want to thank you, Khalid, and you, Eric, for sharing these really, really valuable insights with our audience today. And thank our audience for joining us. Just as a reminder, this will be rolled into our ground control, transformation ground control podcast that you can get on any podcast platform. We do these Transformation Tuesday live streams every Tuesday morning with different guests in the industry and our internal stakeholders. If you follow Eric or Third Stage on any social media platform, you can be notified when they're happening and engage live with our audience. But with that, we will sign off for today. But thank you so much for joining us, and thank you to our great guests for all that valuable insight.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. Thanks for the great questions.
Thanks for having me.
All right. Have a good week, everyone.
Yep. Bye.